Have you ever wondered why the greatest clarity in life often comes when we are completely alone? Most people fear solitude, but what if walking alone is not a weakness, but the path to true freedom and understanding? In this video, we'll uncover why solitude is not emptiness, but the hidden source of strength, wisdom, and inner vision. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover may completely change the way you see yourself and the world around you. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. And if you find value in these timeless insights, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the wisdom we share here. Part 1, Opening Hook, Solitude as the Hidden Gift. Most people dread being alone. The empty room, the quiet streets, the silence that stretches longer than comfort allows. These are moments that many try to fill with distractions, noise, or company. Yet Alan Watts often reminded us that solitude is not the enemy, but a hidden gift. He asked us to consider, what if the very moments we resist most are the ones that carry the key to clarity? When we walk alone, something begins to shift. Without the constant pull of others' opinions, without the endless need to perform and be acknowledged, we begin to hear a different voice, the one within. Solitude has always been misunderstood as loneliness, a punishment, or a sign of weakness. But in truth, for those who dare to embrace it, solitude becomes the fertile soil in which clarity grows. Taoist sages would retreat into mountains, not because they hated people, but because silence revealed the greater order of things. Buddhists teach that only in stillness can the illusion of the self dissolve, leaving behind something freer and truer. Even existentialists discovered that when stripped of society's noise, man faces the raw fact of existence, and in that confrontation discovers himself. So here lies the hook. Solitude is not about escaping life, but about seeing it more clearly. The question is, can you bear to be alone long enough to let truth emerge? And perhaps even more important, what will you discover about yourself when no one else is watching? Parte solitude a veces. Loneliness. A subtle but crucial difference. It's easy to confuse solitude with loneliness, but they are not the same. Loneliness carries a sting. It is the ache of wanting company and not finding it. Solitude, on the other hand, is fullness. It is the silence that allows the heart and mind to breathe. Alan Watts often pointed out that solitude is not emptiness, it is presence, an opportunity to be with oneself without distraction. Imagine walking in a forest. If you feel lonely, every rustling leaf reminds you of your isolation. But if you embrace solitude, the same leaf becomes part of a grand conversation with nature. Taoist wisdom tells us that nothing truly exists in isolation. The tree, the river, the bird, and even you are interwoven parts of the same pattern. To sit alone, then, is never to be cut off. It is simply to realign with the deeper rhythm of life. In Buddhism, loneliness is seen as attachment unfulfilled, a craving for what is absent. Solitude, by contrast, is liberation from craving. It is the space in which the self learns to rest in its own company. And from an existentialist view, solitude forces us to face the truth of being. Without masks, without roles, without the safety of a crowd, we encounter the raw self, and from there, authenticity can be born. So the difference is profound. Loneliness shrinks the soul, solitude expands it. And the choice between the two lies not in whether we are with others, but in how we perceive the silence around us. Part 3, Dropping the Masks. Freedom from performance. From the moment we are children, we are taught to perform, to smile when we don't feel like smiling, to agree when we want to resist, to shape ourselves into what will be accepted. Slowly, almost unconsciously, life becomes a stage where every interaction feels like an act. We wear masks not only for strangers, but even for our closest friends and family. Alan Watts warned that this constant performance robs us of our natural state because we are too busy pretending to live rather than actually living. But something remarkable happens when solitude enters. When no audience is watching, there is no need to play a role. The actor steps off the stage, the masks fall, and the raw face of the self is revealed. In solitude, the pressure to perform evaporates, leaving only truth. This can feel frightening at first, after all. If we are not the roles we play, then who are we? Buddhism would say that this is the beginning of liberation, the recognition that the self we cling to is itself an illusion. Taoism offers the same wisdom in different words: stop forcing, stop pretending, and life flows in its natural way. Even existentialist thought reminds us authenticity arises only when we stop living for others and begin living from within. So solitude is not about withdrawal, it is about returning. Returning to the place where we no longer need to impress, where masks dissolve, and where we are finally free to see who we truly are. Part 4. The world's noise versus the silence within. Step into the world, and you are immediately met with noise conversations layered with half-truths, the endless scroll of opinions, the frantic rhythm of competition. Society rewards the loudest voices, the busiest schedules, the constant performance of success. Yet beneath this noise, many quietly wonder why they still feel hollow. Alan Watts often said that the problem is not the presence of sound, but the absence of silence. Without silence, there is no space for truth to emerge. When you sit in solitude, the noise begins to fade. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, your mind still buzzing with echoes of society's demands. But as the quiet deepens, something shifts. Silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror you begin to see not the version of yourself shaped by others, but the unpolished truth of who you are. Taoist philosophy compares it to a lake. When disturbed, the water reflects nothing clearly. Leave it still, and the reflection becomes pure. Existentialists, too, found value in this silence. They believed that when stripped of distraction, man confronts the essence of existence, the raw being that can't be escaped. Buddhism adds yet another dimension. Silence is not empty, it is alive, carrying the breath of awareness itself. So, while the world clamors for attention, solitude invites you to listen differently, not to the noise outside, but to the clarity waiting inside. Silence is not the absence of life. It is life in its most honest form. Part 5. Clarity. The inner vision beyond appearances. When the noise subsides and the masks fall away, what remains is clarity, the kind of vision that doesn't rely on appearances or roles. In solitude, the mind ceases its frantic running and begins to settle, like muddy water left undisturbed. Alan Watts often said that when there is no one left to impress, the true self quietly emerges. This self is not the character society asks us to play, but the essence that has always been there, hidden beneath layers of expectation. Clarity is not a dramatic revelation. It is a gentle unfolding. Suddenly, the decisions that once felt clouded by doubt reveal their simplicity. The inner conflicts shaped by comparison lose their grip. In Taoist thought, this is the return to the Tao, the natural way of things, effortless and clear once we stop forcing outcomes. Buddhism echoes this truth. In stillness, the mind sees reality as it is, not as it is filtered through craving and fear. Existential thinkers would call this the confrontation with authenticity. Alone, without distraction, you see not who you are supposed to be, but who you actually are. And while this vision may be sobering at first, it carries the profound gift of freedom. Clarity does not come by adding more to our lives, but by subtracting. By letting go of noise, illusions, and false identities, we begin to perceive life in its simplest, most truthful form. Solitude does not blind us with emptiness. It sharpens our inner vision until the truth is undeniable. Part 6. Freedom from the chains of approval. One of the heaviest burdens we carry is the constant hunger for approval. From parents, teachers, colleagues, even strangers online, we measure our worth by how others respond to us. But Alan Watts reminded us that true freedom begins when we stop letting applause or criticism dictate our value. In solitude, this truth becomes unmistakable. When you are alone, there is no audience to clap, no critic to condemn. The silence strips away the false economy of approval. At first, this can feel terrifying, as if you have lost the currency by which life is measured. But slowly, you realize something deeper. Your existence does not need permission to be valuable. It simply is. Buddhism calls this freedom from attachment. especially attachment to praise and blame, which rise and fall like clouds passing through the sky. Taoist wisdom adds that water does not need approval to flow. It simply follows its course, nourishing all it touches. In the same way, your worth is not dependent on recognition, but on the simple fact of being. Even existentialists observed that when a person no longer lives for others' validation, they begin to live authentically, with choices rooted in personal truth rather than societal demand. This is the quiet liberation solitude offers, the recognition that you are already enough, even in silence. Approval can be sweet, but it is fleeting. Solitude reveals the deeper sweetness of freedom, the knowledge that nothing external can add to or subtract from your inherent worth. Part 7. When illusions fall away, relationships shift. As solitude deepens, something subtle yet profound begins to happen. Relationships change. Not through anger, not through rejection, but simply because the illusions that once held them together can no longer stand. Many bonds are sustained by performance, by unspoken agreements to play roles for one another. When the performance ends, the energy keeping those connections alive often dissolves too. Alan Watts spoke of this natural dissolving. When we stop pretending, we stop feeding the false. In solitude, you may notice certain friendships or associations slipping quietly away. This can feel like loss, but in truth it is transformation. What is shallow cannot endure the weight of authenticity. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the law of impermanence at work. Everything that arises will eventually pass. Relationships are no exception. To cling desperately to those that no longer resonate is to resist the flow of life. Taoism offers a similar reminder. Rivers change their course, and so do human connections. Letting them shift is not failure, but harmony with nature. Existential thought frames this as courage. The courage to allow what no longer serves truth to fall away, even if it leaves you standing alone. For in that standing there is strength. So, solitude doesn't destroy relationships, it reveals them. It strips away the false and leaves only what is real. And in that revelation, the space opens for connections that are genuine, not sustained by illusion, but rooted in truth. Part 8. True companionship emerges from solitude. When you learn to walk alone, something paradoxical happens. You become more capable of walking with others. True companionship is not born out of need or dependency, but out of wholeness. Alan Watts often said that real friendship is when two people walk side by side, without demand, without clinging, simply choosing each other freely. In solitude, you discover that you are complete. You no longer seek others to fill your emptiness, but to share your fullness. This shift transforms every relationship. Suddenly, you no longer ask, "What can I get from this person?" Instead, the question becomes, "What can we create together from a place of freedom?" Buddhism describes this as compassion without attachment. You care, but you do not cling. You love, but you do not bind. Taoism, too, points to this harmony. When two rivers flow side by side, they do not compete. They nourish the land together, each retaining its nature. Even existentialists remind us that only an authentic individual can build authentic bonds. When masks are gone and approval is no longer the currency, what remains is a connection that breathes on its own. So, solitude is not the end of relationships, it is the rebirth of them. It is in the quiet strength of being whole alone that we find the capacity for genuine companionship. And from this ground of solitude, love and friendship finally become what they were always meant to be: free, fearless, and real. Part 9. The quiet paradox of awakening. The further one walks into solitude, the quieter life becomes. This is the paradox of awakening. The wiser a person grows, the less they need noise, validation, or comparison. Alan Watts often pointed out that clarity doesn't make life louder, it makes it simpler. The endless chase for recognition, wealth, or power loses its grip, and in its place comes an appreciation for the present moment. Imagine a candle in a dark room. The flame is small, yet its light fills the space without effort. Awakening is much like that candle, subtle, steady, and radiant in its simplicity. Taoist wisdom reflects this truth. The sage does not seek to control the river, he moves with it. In surrendering to life's flow, he gains the greatest strength. Buddhism teaches the same paradox. Emptiness is fullness. When you stop grasping, everything you need appears. The still mind sees reality as it is, and in that vision, suffering softens. Existential thinkers add that awakening means facing the absurdity of existence without despair, choosing instead to live with authenticity and courage. As solitude deepens, comparison fades. You no longer measure yourself against others, because you've discovered something unshakable within. The quieter you become, the more profound life reveals itself to be. In this quiet, awakening blooms not as a dramatic revelation, but as the simple joy of being fully present. Part 10. So we return to where we began. Solitude, so often feared, is not a punishment, but a revelation. It is the place where noise dissolves, masks fall, illusions fade, and clarity shines through. Alan Watts urged us to see solitude not as a void, but as a mirror, one that reflects back the truth of who we are when there is no one left to impress. In the silence of being alone, we find freedom from the chains of approval, the courage to release shallow ties, and the strength to nurture genuine bonds. Taoism reminds us that still water reflects clearly, Buddhism that stillness unveils reality, and existentialism that authenticity is born when we stand alone before life. All paths lead to the same insight. Solitude is the fertile ground where wisdom grows. The question now turns to you. Have you ever allowed yourself the space to sit in silence, free from distraction, long enough to hear what your own soul is saying? If you did, what truths might emerge? Would you discover fear or freedom? We invite you to pause, reflect, and share your thoughts. Is solitude, to you, a punishment or a gift? Leave a comment with your perspective. We'd love to hear it. And if this journey resonated with you, subscribe for more timeless wisdom inspired by Alan Watts and the great traditions of thought that continue to guide us toward clarity.